If you look at any Hollywood or high-end video production, you're generally going to see three different types of footage that is captured. One is handheld footage, a second is stabilized or gimbal footage, and the third is slider footage. And traditionally, a professional slider or a slider that could get you professional results was prohibitively expensive. So if you wanted a shot like that in your video production, you had to either front up for the rental or the purchase cost. And this meant traditionally, no matter how creative and skilled you were likely restricted by the size of your budget. But recently, the cost of this gear has dropped dramatically, bringing it in sort of the price range of somebody who's just a hobbyist or independent filmmaker, or somebody's making a few YouTube videos or sort of family videos or narrative films. The budget constraint has really been lifted, where it used to cost thousands for equipment like this. We're now, for a few $100s, are getting things that perform in very much the same way. And recently I took the family to a place called Kangaroo Island, which is, I honestly think, one of the most beautiful and incredible places in Australia. And of course, there's lots of kangaroos and there's lots of koalas. And I really wanted to capture the detail and the feeling of this place to the best of my ability. And I brought with me this slider, this budget-friendly YC Onion Hotdog Slider. Now, in full disclosure, before this trip, I determined that I really did want to bring a slider with me. So I did reach out to YC Onion and said, hey, could you send me out your least expensive of the hot dog model sliders? And they sent me out this version. It is the 24-inch or 60-centimeter version. So although I didn't pay for it, I did do a lot of research, and this was the slider that I wanted. And if they wouldn't have sent it out to me, I would have just bought it anyways. And as you'll be able to see from some of the shots that are playing on screen now, this unit really does capture some sort of cinematic, incredible feeling shots that you just couldn't do handheld, you couldn't do with a gimbal. It's something you absolutely need a slider to get that sort of impact with. And I used it in two ways broadly on the trip. I used it for time-lapse video or time-lapse photo turned into video, and I used it for sort of real-time video shooting. And I also positioned it in two different ways. The actual slider itself comes with feet on the bottom of it that just fold out. That actually allows you to set it right on the ground, which gets you a pretty cool effect, because since it's so close to the ground, you can see that foreground movement of the ground in the foreground, which really creates some interesting depth and sort of multi-dimensional feel to the movement. And other times, particularly when I was doing time-lapse, I put it on a tripod. It's just got some tripod sort of mounts in the bottom of the slider, so I just screwed it on a big heavy-duty tripod, and I used it that way. But I think you'll agree, you've seen these shots, you just couldn't get that sort of footage or that sort of feel just using a gimbal or handheld. It really is something completely unique that you need a slider to capture. Now, I have put my best price links in the description down below, and that will just take you through to the best price for actually the exact unit that I've got here. Now, it does come in multiple sizes. I've got the 60-centimeter or 24-inch model. It's got, I think there's 4 different sizes going all the way up to 39 inches, so over 3 feet in total. I went with the 60-centimeter model because I just kind of thought a smaller model was going to be easier for me to move around, and I thought it would be more likely I would use it if it was smaller. And certainly I did find when I was hiking with it or had to carry it some distance, I was glad that I went with sort of the smaller model. It's got a couple of functions that most sliders don't have, and that is it has the ability to actually pivot the head or the ball head on the actual slider while it is sliding. That gives you the ability to do 2 different shots. One is a parallax shot and the other is a pan shot. So that means while the slider is moving, the actual head and the camera is also moving at the same time. And so the parallax shot is probably something you'd use. I've actually used the parallax shot in my YouTube videos at times, where I've actually got the camera moving in front of me and I'm using the parallax effect to just keep me in the center of frame. So even though it is sliding, it is also turning and keeping me in the center of frame, which is a quite cool effect. That is also a good shot to use if you've got sort of product photography or product video or something small that you're covering. You could even use it in nature if you're covering something small like an ant's nest or an interesting insect or something like that. It will just keep that object in the middle of frame and then sort of scan and kind of circle around it. The other way you can use this is in pan mode. Now, what that will do is that will actually cause the slider, as it slides, it will pan the head and it will pan the camera. Now, I tend to use this in time lapse. I think this looks really good in time lapse. And you can use it in really extreme ways, so you just have a really huge whipping pan, or you can just use it in very, very subtle ways. And I think both of these effects make the power make the small slider more powerful. So if I'm using a small slider, this small slider, and I feel like, oh, I really wish I had the longer one, all I got to do is add a little bit of pan, and it just adds extra movement to the shot, which makes me feel like, oh, I'm not missing out by having the sort of bigger or longer slider. Now, the slider can also be used as a manual slider as well. I have the full setup, which has the motorized head on it, which actually can be controlled via the panel on the actual motor itself or via app. But you can actually remove that and use it as a manual slider. And often when I'm doing product video and I just want to do something really quick and just get some quick shots, I don't feel like I want to spend the time to program the motor and use the app. In that case, I just whip it with my hands and I can get a really, really good effect. And particularly you can sort of speed up the shot and slow down the shot. You can use different frame rates. So I find that there are times where I just use it as a manual slider. But the bulk of the time I am using it as an automated slider, as you're seeing it go back and forth here. And both via the app and via the motor, you can control the speed of this from 0 or 1% all the way up to 100%. One thing I will say is at certain speeds, the motor is louder than at other speeds. So if you're worried about the sound actually getting into your audio, then you want to play with it and find the speeds that sort of provide the least noise. Right now, it's just running at 51%, and you'll find that you cannot hear that even though I've got the microphone here sort of right next to the slider. It is absolutely dead silent. But if you do crank it up to 100%, you will start to hear some noise. It makes a sort of a little bit of a whirring or sort of mechanical noise, particularly when it's starting up and slowing down at the end of its runs. But I'm generally using it at a much slower speed than this. I think the slower speeds are a little bit more cinematic. And I found that 51% is definitely the quietest. So that's generally how I use it if you're actually going to have it anywhere near a microphone. And when I've shot YouTube videos in the past and I have it just sort of scanning around me while I'm talking to the camera, I'm using it at 51%. Now you can program the motor, or via the app, you can tell it to just do one pass. So you set it up, you have the pass, you set the speed, and it just does one pass and stops. Or you can set it up to repeat, so it just bounces back and forth, back and forth. When I'm shooting the YouTube videos and I'm using it, I just have it bouncing back and forth, back and forth. And it can also be used for dedicated time-lapse shots where you can actually program it via the app, and it's got a little plug on the side of the motor that then goes into the camera for a shutter release. And what happens is you tell it how long or what sort of movement and how many shots you want, and you program the entire time-lapse through the app. That then gives the information to the motor, and even if you walk away from the thing or you close the app after that, it's programmed and is just going to continue to take the shots and run through the time lapse that you've programmed into the motor, which is a really, really cool way to use it. Now, the whole thing is powered in two different ways. You can actually plug a power bank into it, like a rechargeable power bank like you might use to recharge your phone, but you can also use an Sony NPF battery that just slides into the base of the motor. I just use a Sony NPF battery. They're super cheap. I've just bought some generic ones off eBay. I'll link those in the description down below. All I do is pop those in, and that works for me. It lasts for ages. In fact, on the whole trip, I had one battery and I never had to recharge it. Now, I will say sliders aren't for everyone, and there are some disadvantages to a slider. And the single biggest disadvantage of it, from my perspective, is it takes a little bit of time to get set up and put in the position and sort of get the shot that you want to shoot. And I would say, on average, now that I'm used to it from the time of taking it out of the bag, putting it on the tripod, setting up on the ground, doing everything, I'm probably somewhere in the order of 5 to 7 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if you are with a family or you're doing a really busy shoot or you're time poor, that 5 to 7 minutes starts to add up. So, 5 to 7 minutes here, 5 to 7 minutes there, 5 or 6 of those shots, and the hours start to go by pretty quickly. So I think it is critical with this to know that you're going to be doing the type of shooting that you actually have the time to set it up properly and frame your shot and get the shot you want. Also, keep in mind that on a whole video project, like the video project I was working on for my Kangaroo Island trip, it only takes a handful of these shots to really elevate the quality of your video. So just mixing in a few of these time lapses or a few of these video shots is really going to up the way that your video feels and looks. So don't feel like you actually have to use it for every single shot. That's just not the case. And in many ways, what this slider is all about is what this channel is all about, which is getting the best in photo and video with the gear that you can afford or the gear that you already have. So if that's something you're into, be sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit that bell notification.